All right, welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to talk about adding real numbers. So in this lesson, you're going to learn how to add real numbers, how to find the opposite of a number, it's also known as the additive inverse, and how to evaluate algebraic expressions with real numbers. So adding real numbers just really refers to adding positive and negative numbers. We can start off by doing this using a number line, just so you can kind of see how this works. So for example, we have -4 plus 6. So starting from 0, we're going to go to the left 4 to -4. So here's -4. And so now if we add 6 to it, we're going to go back to the right 6. And we get that -4 plus 6 is equal to 2. So now let's practice using the number line to add some real numbers. So we start from 0, and we want to add -1 plus -2. So we're going to start at 0, and then we're going to go to the left 1 to -1. And so now we have -1 plus -2, so we want to go to the left 2 more. And -1 plus -2 will give you -3. If we do the same thing here on the bottom, we'll start at 0. And then we're going to go to the right 5. And so now from 5, we're going to take away 8. And so we're going to go from 5, and we're going to go back to the left 8. And once again, we get -3. Now, we don't need a number line in order to add these numbers. Adding real numbers is only really challenging because it's easy to make mistakes with positive and negative numbers. So if you're adding two numbers with the same sign, if they're either both positive or both negative, then you just want to add the numbers together and keep the sign. If you're adding two numbers with different signs, one positive and one negative, then subtract the numbers and keep the sign of the one with the greatest absolute value, or keep the sign of the bigger number. So now we want to add these together, and we're not going to use a number line. So we look at the first one, -8 plus -11. They have the same sign, and so we'll add the numbers. 11 plus 8 is 19. And because they have the same sign, we'll just keep the sign, and now it's negative. On the second example, they have opposite signs. And so here we want to subtract the numbers. 10 minus 2 is 8. And we're going to keep the sign of the bigger number, the sign of the number with the biggest absolute value, which in this case is 10. So it's going to be +8. When you enter your answers on the homework, you'll not need the plus sign. Finally, we've got 3 numbers to add. So let's just deal with the first 2 first, and then we'll add the last one. 3 and -7 have opposite signs, so we're going to subtract the numbers. 7 minus 3 is 4. And we're going to keep the sign of the bigger one, or the one with the biggest absolute value. And so that's -4. And now -4 plus -8. They both have the same sign, so we're going to add the numbers. 8 plus 4 is 12. And keep the sign. Now, when we talk about adding real numbers, we need to talk about what's known as the additive inverse. 0 is what's known as the additive identity, which just means that you can add 0 to anything and you'll never change the number. You can add 0 as many times as you want and nothing will change. So what we call the opposite of a number is whatever you would have to add for that number to be 0. Right? So it's also known as the additive inverse. So for example, if we're given 7, the opposite would be -7, because 7 plus -7 is equal to 0. So let's practice finding the opposite. We just want to know, what would you add to these numbers to get 0? Well, if we want to add something to 10 to get 0, we would want to add negative 10. 10 plus negative 10 is 0. If we want to add something to negative 3 to get 0, we would add positive 3. And if we want to add something to 1/2 to get 0, we would add negative 1/2. So finding the opposite of a number really just means we're changing the sign. It's going to go from positive to negative or negative to positive. So in this case, the minus sign represents the opposite part. The opposite of a number will just give you the number back. So for example, the opposite of 3 is negative 3. And then the opposite of negative 3 is 3. So if we have two negative signs beside each other like that, then that will just be the opposite of the opposite, and it'll make the number positive. So let's try this. We have negative 10. Well, those two negatives will become a plus. It's two opposites, and so we get positive 10. The same thing will happen in the second example. Negative 2x. Well, we have two negative signs. Those become positive, and we just get 2x. Now, the last one's just a little bit different because instead of parentheses, we have an absolute value. And the absolute value of negative 6 is just positive 6. And we still have that one negative in front. And so that one still winds up being negative 6. So there's a difference between what you would do with parentheses and what you would do with an absolute value. Remember, an absolute value will always make the number positive. So, as before, we can use letters to represent numbers. And we're going to use what we know about adding real numbers to simplify some expressions. And we're going to do this for the next few sections. Okay, so just remember the rules for adding positive and negative numbers. So now we're going to assume that x is equal to 3 and y is equal to negative 5. And we want to find 2x plus y. So as before, let's just take the letters out and replace them with parentheses. X is 3 and y is negative 5. So now remember, by the order of operations, when you do multiplication before addition, 2 times 3 is 6 plus negative 5. Now we have two numbers. Their signs are opposite. One's positive and one's negative. So we're going to subtract the numbers. 6 minus 5 is 1. And keep the sign of the bigger number, or the biggest absolute value. So this is just going to be positive 1. So at the end of this lesson, you should be able to add real numbers using a number line. You should be able to add real numbers without a number line. You should be able to find the opposite of a number and evaluate expressions using real numbers.